Who all can tell you not to sing your story? Who all can tell you that you're singing off key? You are the dancer, you are not the dancer. You are the song, not the one who sang. Be a beautiful songbird. No, you tell the truth. No, you tell the truth. You tell the truth.
Welcome, everyone. This is Thrive with Morella, the show for people who want to thrive body, mind, heart, and spirit. Some of us have at least once pondered, I know I have, we've pondered what would happen if I lost my home and all of my possessions in a fire. And that's exactly what happened to my guest, Karen Auvinen. Karen, I actually don't know if I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Is it Auvinen?
Auvinen.
Say that again, sorry?
You got it. Auvinen.
Auvinen. Okay, Karen Auvinen, welcome. So let me tell you about Karen. That's what happened to her. Karen settled down to write in an isolated cabin in the Rockies, full of the beautiful artifacts she had collected through her life, including a collection of over 100 cookbooks, a gorgeous farm table of solid oak, and her great-grandmother's 19th century Finnish Bible. In addition to, and I know this is the piece that I also felt the most, her computer with all of her writing. And one morning, while she was delivering the mail along her rural route in the mountains, her cast iron stove burnt her home down to ashes. And in her new book, Rough Beauty, 40 Seasons of Mountain Living, Karen examines her life's journey to the point of the fire, while beginning a new adventure that rebuilds her life, reconciles her with her past, and even finds love. And I tell you, it's a riveting book. I was telling Karen just before we started live that I love her writing. And I tell you what, this is why you will love her writing too if you grab her book. Karen is a poet. She's also a mountain woman, a lifelong Westerner and writer. Her work has appeared in the New York Times as well as numerous literary journals. She's a former artist in residence at the state of Colorado. For the state of Colorado. Karen is the winner of 2 Academy of American Poet Awards and has been nominated for several pushcart prizes in fiction. She earned her MA in poetry from the University of Colorado Boulder under the mentorship of Lucia Berlin, and went on to earn her PhD in fiction writing from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Currently, she teaches film and popular culture at the University of Colorado Boulder. Karen, welcome to Thrive with Morella.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here with you.
I am thrilled to have you. You know, you are no slouch when it comes to writing. I'm in the process of writing my first book. It's definitely not a memoir. It's more of a self-help book. But I read your stuff, and you know, you have the gift. Your writing is just beautiful. It's that beautiful blend of poetry and prose, and it's just so yummy to read. So,
well, thank you. I mean, this is where, I got a master's in poetry, as you said, and my degree my PhD is in fiction. And so my first book is, of course, a memoir, which is nonfiction. But, poets make good memoirists, because for me, the best memoirs are the memoirs that pay attention to language. It has to be a good story, but the evocation of the moment through language is super important to me.
Yeah, and you can tell, anybody who has that kind of flavor for poetry, you can really feel that in your writing. So it's really wonderful. So Karen, I didn't give you a heads up before the show, so I'm going to put you on the spot, because the very first question I ask all of my guests is the following. Karen, since this show is called Thrive with Morella, what is one of your personal keys to thriving in your life? It can be anything.
Oh, it's my connection to nature. Absolutely. So I like to say I live wild, which is not, kind of Rick Bass, another Western writer, living wild, but I do live in the mountains, and I need to be surrounded by solitude and space. And I need it as an antidote to the modern world. And for me, I just needed it as an antidote, honestly, to my brain, which is a little bit too fast. So it's absolutely knowing that a fox will come into my yard every morning to look up at the house and hope that I'm going to give it something and that the bear comes through and that it's quiet at night and there's no street lights. And I just really need to have the earth beneath my feet. So that's it.
I couldn't agree more. I actually grew up in Venezuela, in Caracas, and then from there I lived in New York City for 6 years. So I was 33 before I moved to Vermont, and I just keep moving further and further away from bigger urban areas. And my dream is to be in the woods, at the foot of a mountain. So I totally get it.
It's a great way. I mean, I know it's not practical for everyone, but I think the kind of connection to nature. So either if you live in nature or you can kind of connect with it through your parks and local greenways, I think that's also super important. Nature kind of washes away all the stuff that we think is important.
Absolutely.
And resets us, I think.
So speaking of, letting go of all the things that we think are important, you start off in your book in a compelling way. You start with the fire, and within a few hours you lost everything. You watched it all burn. And so what I thought I wanted to ask you about that is, would you agree with the idea that sometimes the worst things that can happen to us can also be the best things that can happen?
Oh, absolutely. In the moment, of course, it doesn't feel like that. It feels like it's something. I mean, that was something like a death in my life, and it was so shocking to me. I was breathless. I thought, oh, what do I do now? I thought more than what do I do now? I thought I should just quit. But I absolutely, in the end, it kicked me off the path that I was on, kind of emotionally and spiritually and psychologically, which was to kind of isolate myself more and more and more and more and more and shut out the world. So I escaped into nature to shut out the world and emerged realizing that no one does it alone, that you need help, and that people are kind and generous. I didn't learn that when I was growing up. But the first thing that happens after the fire is this little mountain town of Jamestown, 300 people whom I admittedly didn't like them. And I know a number of them didn't like me either, but I worked in the little cafe in town. They throw me a benefit. Mm-hmm. And people I hate, people who hate me, people who don't know me show up to this benefit because it's a mountain community, and they donate money, and they raise several $1,000s for me. I would never have recovered because I didn't have renter's insurance at the time. I'm old enough that, when I started renting, nobody had renter's insurance. So I had no safety net. And so this town was my safety net.
Yeah.
And I really learned that real community isn't a bunch of people like-minded people, holding hands, singing Kumbaya. It's actually a relationship. And the relationship is more important than the individual. And so when somebody needs help, people step up. And it was a moment of real grace in my life. I was stunned.
Yeah. And, as you're saying the word relationship, what comes to me is that your book is really about relationship. Your book is about your relationship with your mother and your relationship with your father and your relationship with Elvis. And, Jay, I think, is it Jay that... Now I don't know if I'm thinking of the right person. But
the man I meet at the end, whom I just have to tell you, we got married on Saturday. So
no way.
Yeah.
So that's a turn in the story.
Yeah. So I'm sorry to spoil it, but anyway, or whatever. But yeah. So we met 4 months after my dog died, and he really has been the first significant relationship in my life. Besides the dog. Mm-hmm. And I was never a dater. I thought I would spend the rest of my life alone. And so, yeah, that's another relationship. But then the other relationship in the book, of course, there's people, there's community, and there's landscape. And that is where I think a lot of the poetic passages come from, just thinking about and looking at what's happening outside my window.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so, I was curious if you would tell, here we're going down the thread of relationship, and I love how you're highlighting the relationship with landscape. I in a little while, I want to ask you about Elvis and his role in your life, and we'll get there. But the first part of the book, you really talk about essentially becoming what you call a Marlboro woman. And you talk about, leaving your father's house at 16 and then leaving your mother's house around 18, I think you said. And I was curious if you could share with us what it meant or what it means to you to be this Marlboro woman, and how it was that those kind of that history with your family led to that.
Well, hopefully I can get to, I have two ideas about what that means for me. The first idea, when I was leaving home, it meant that I was going to go it alone. So I believe that kind of myth of the West, that I was going to be the lonesome cowgirl on the horizon. And part of that was a kind of response to the messages I got as a girl growing up, that I was weak, that I was to be a supporting player in somebody else's life. And this is, I mean, I'm not that old, and I still see in my first years that I teach at CU, women who are told to go to college to find a doctor to support them for the rest of their lives. So, that stuff is still in our cultures, but I was told, I'd make somebody a good wife, honestly. And I watched my father's relationship with my mother, and it was not, her role was not anything anyone would aspire to. He kept her pretty, kind of under his thumb. And I thought, no. And so part of it was, it was my rejection of that, but it was also, I really wanted to show them and show them that I was strong. I felt strong. I have agency. I have an opinion. I have an idea about what my life should be like, and I'm going to act on that. And so I'm going to go out there alone and experience my strength. So I camped alone, and I did things out in nature alone because I wanted to know that I could. Mm-hmm. And I think that we don't have enough books about women going it alone. So that's one of the reasons I wrote this book. I was going to say something else about the Marlboro woman, and now I've forgotten. But I think I learned that I have an essay working now. So she was going to be my fist raised, right? But I also feel like I'm writing an essay right now in which I say, the Marlboro man / Marlboro woman is a good role model for a lot of women who don't think they can. Mm-hmm. So I'm encouraging women to, yes, you can. Go out there alone, be in nature, develop a relationship. You don't need other people to do this. There's such liberty and freedom in that kind of independence. Experience your own agency, is what I'm saying.
Right. Experience your own agency. I love that. And I love that concept, that vision of the Marlboro woman, which leads me to a different question, which I actually wrote it towards the end because I also think it's like towards the latter part of your book. And it's to talk about the word lonely. You say that often people, before you were with Jay, often people would ask you, aren't you lonely? And you write something beautiful. I'm just going to read this from your book. You say, lonely is a word that describes what it means to live profoundly. Moving deeply in the world, you let the 1,000 distractions fall away and you become more authentic, more who you really are. So would you say the Marlboro woman is lonely? Talk to us about lonely.
The one I'm aspiring to is, so again, I just want to just divide this into like what I thought I was doing by being the Marlboro woman, and now how I think the Marlboro woman can be really useful for women, and it was really useful for me. It is to actually go out there and be lonely. So lonely in the sense that I'm alone, but lonely in the sense that, as I'm defining it there, in that my connection to the world, I found my wholeness in solitude and space. And really the natural world coaxed me back to myself. So nature, as Gretel Ehrlich says, invites us to be constantly what we are. So that's the Marlboro woman I'm trying to get at, that loneliness of deep solitude and profound living. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to reclaim lonely as a good word, not as a bad word.
Yeah, so. And I love, that's the feeling that I got when I was reading that piece about loneliness, or that idea of being lonely in your book. I said, oh, yes, that's giving ourselves that space to be alone, to be lonely is really the space where we can discover ourselves, where we're not filling in the space with the phone or social media or a body just to have a warm body next to us, but actually being in that space of even discomfort at times, of being with ourselves.
And discomfort's part of it. Wendell Berry says, only when we have discovered the world for ourselves do we cease to be alone. Mm-hmm. So really, you find this connection and you realize you're a part of it all. And that's fantastic. You're connected to larger things than just yourself, which is, I think, something to aspire to.
Absolutely. So what emerges from the book as, maybe the core relationship in the narrative that you're telling through the majority of the book is your relationship with Elvis. And it almost, for a good chunk of the book, it feels like the book is just as much about Elvis as it is about you. So tell us about Elvis's role in your life.
Well, Elvis, so the first part of the book, I spend kind of trying to explain why I became a Marlboro woman, which was this kind of very violent, isolating childhood that I had, and messages that weren't very supportive of me. And so I really didn't learn what unconditional love was from my family. I didn't learn what trust was from my family. I didn't really even know what a relationship was. And so in my early 30s, I adopted this 72-pound Husky mix who was a runner, as all Huskies are, and he's blonde and beautiful and has a personality all his own and has a mind of his own. And so I had to learn how to have a relationship with this dog I had to learn how to communicate with him. And so he really teaches me what it means to be in relationship with somebody. I mean, I say in the end of the book, I think he inserted himself between, my breastplate, this kind of hard armor I wore, and my skin. And the process of kind of softening and learning to love happens because of Elvis. And, but, I think one of the most telling thing is that when I trained him, he would always run away. So I tried to take him to dog obedience classes. No, that was a bust. So I tied a leash around my waist and I clipped him to it. And in the morning when I had my coffee, if I sat down, he sat down. If I got up, he got up. And so there was like this cord to kind of like let him know we were pack members and that he was supposed to stay with me. And it helped him kind of not stay in my sight on the trail, but circle around to me. Mm-hmm. In the end, that cord actually became this kind of metaphorical cord between my heart and his, that we could locate each other in the world. I knew what that dog was thinking. He knew what I was thinking. And so he really, I say he was in my ambassador of goodwill. He would greet people when I wouldn't and start conversations. But he also taught me about love. And, it's no surprise that 4 months after he died, I met Greg, who is my partner now, my husband. It's hard to say husband. And I think it was because this dog taught me this is how you do it.
Right. Yeah, I love the little snippet. You give a beautiful image of Elvis stopping every car and getting kisses. Like there's a line of cars and they're all stopping to say hello to Elvis and get kisses from Elvis, which is so sweet.
I used to let him outside the Merc sometimes when I was working there and let him out and just to kind of do a little tour and come back. And one day someone said, "Your dog's in the street." And I went out there and there he was. And he had a line of 6 cars and he was jumping up on everybody's car to give kisses. So.
That's so great. So there's a passage that, I don't know, do you have a copy of your book?
I do.
The paperback? Mm-hmm. Because I would love if you go to page 79 and if you could read that section to us.
The first part.
Yeah. Then there's the next paragraph. Well, if you could read the first part, and yes, let's start there.
Is this summer into fall we're talking about?
I don't have the book in front of me. What I have is the in the days, and then
yes, yeah. I got that. Okay. In the days after I'd watched my house burn, a great weight lifted. I felt strangely euphoric. No longer saddled with counting every penny for rent or bills, unburdened by a house full of goods that required care, cleaning, or mending. Mine was the ecstasy of the unencumbered. There was a moment of pure bird-like flight as I soared above it all, followed by the heft of gravity, a slow recognition that all evidence of my existence had been reduced to ash. There was nothing left to mark the way I'd come. No books, no papers, no writing, no words. Not one diploma. I could disappear without a trace. This is what dying feels like, I thought. In the end, it would be so easy to let go. I was flying in the air. I did not yet know I was in free fall.
So there's this juxtaposition there where you know, some of us, when we think of the idea of losing everything, first it's the devastation, but then it's like, oh, there it is. She's talking about the freedom, the lightness. Maybe this is a wonderful thing. And then you tell us you're free falling, like, oh no. So did you have that experience of, so talk to us first. I would love to hear, you know, about the, all of a sudden, you know, having nothing. Right? Did you, what that?
There is this, I think it was shock, honestly. There was this feeling of lightness, which is interestingly the same lightness I felt when Elvis died. I felt a lightness because he had been very sick, and there's an unburdening. And I think that's part of the shock. And it's a weightless, beautiful feeling. And then all of a sudden you think, oh, you know, everything else returns to you. So it's like stopping, not breathing. And then all of a sudden when breath returns, you think, oh my God. And then the grief comes in.
Yeah.
So there was a moment of feeling like, I don't have to pay my rent. I don't have to clean stuff. I don't have to do anything. But then that was juxtaposed to the moment I woke up. Let's see, this, like 2 days after the fire, I was sleeping on a friend's floor, and I had no clothes. And it had started to snow again. And the town had gathered kind of hastily a bag of clothes, and I was searching for something that fit me. I'm not a size 6. And I put on this sweatshirt, and it smelled like somebody else.
Oh.
Like it smelled like somebody's perfume or their detergent. And I started to cry like a baby, because I thought that, you know, then you start to think there's no comfort, that I don't have my favorite coffee cup. I don't have a bed to go to. I don't have a toothbrush. Mm-hmm. It's overwhelming. Right. And my response always is, I'm going to roll up my sleeves. And so happily, putting your life back together is quite a bit of work. And you start making lists of things that you need and how you're going to get them, and who you can help you. And I kind of burrowed into that for about 3 months of trying to get my life back together. And then after I had a kind of semblance of living, I was living in a place, I had things back in order. That's when the real grief set in. And then I got really depressed. And I had a moment of thinking, why bother? I was, 39. So I turned 40 right after the house burned down. And I thought, you know what? I spent half my life trying so hard to get here. Who cares?
Right.
But you know what? Elvis I thought, and when I had that moment of thinking, well, I just should quit. I mean, I should just quit. But then I thought, who would take care of my dog? This dog is such a pain in the butt. He doesn't listen to anybody. He's totally tied to me. I have to stick around for the dog. So he saved my life.
He saved your life. And then what's interesting at this point in the book, there's a concept that I really grabbed onto, and I thought that maybe we can chew on it a little bit. Because when you're talking about how your carefully constructed fantasy of self-sufficiently was all of a sudden gone, and you were all of a sudden in need of so much, and that you could no longer rely solely on self-determination, that you were going to need help. And so you say here, at the realization that you were going to need help, you write, it's our resistance that kills us, but resist I did, and that made the going so much rougher. So I'd love to talk about this idea of resistance and how it's actually the resistance that makes it hard. Can you tell us about that?
Absolutely. It's the thing, this is what I've experienced a couple of big griefs, actually probably a dozen big griefs in my life, but the losing everything was a huge grief. Elvis was a big grief. And the minute we accept what has happened and move through the grief, things get immeasurably easier. The idea of this didn't happen to me, this can't be happening. Like right after the fire, I try to get into the house to save my computer and I can't. The smoke kicks me back and I fell onto the ground, and I'm on the ground pounding my fist, screaming, no, 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 no. And that is resistance. Like, this is not happening. I refuse to let this happen, even though it's happening in front of my eyes. And that causes pain, right? This is a Buddhist concept.
Right.
You accept, and I'm not a Buddhist, but you accept, if the minute you accept the suffering gets easier,
Right.
and at least it gets manageable. And so I think you can't choose what happens to you, but you can choose how you respond to it. And I'm not saying it's easy.
Right.
I'm saying that it will make it easier. And, I have friends who experienced, Jamestown underwent a catastrophic flood in 2014, and they're still recovering 5 years later. And I have friends who still have such deep grief about the losses of that flood, and it's really hard for them to kind of move on. And I'm not really counseling anyone to leave their grief behind, but there's a way to be graceful with it, to be tender with it, to really move into it.
Yeah, I think of resistance as pushing against. We're like
Yes.
really not wanting something to have happened, or, not wanting things to be a certain way, as if pushing against them is going to change them.
Right, and I'm the queen of that, honestly. I mean, I learned how to do it in my family.
Oh no, we just lost Karen. So hopefully we will be getting her back. I'm not sure what happened, how we lost our connection, but she just disappeared, and hopefully we'll get her back. Let's see if I can move this to the side. It's not making for great television right now, but hopefully we'll be able to get Karen back. Karen's book, if you're tuning in right now, my guest is Karen Auvinen. Her book is Rough Beauty, 40 Seasons of Mountain Living, which is available now. And as you heard me introduce Karen, she is a poet. She is also a fiction writer, but her first book is a memoir, and where she talks about losing all of her possessions. It starts with her losing all of her possessions in a fire, and how that really makes her reevaluate all of her life. And we started off the conversation talking about how the worst thing that can happen is sometimes the best thing that can happen, and how she went from creating this lifestyle where she was completely isolated to realizing that she needed help, that she couldn't do it alone, that she needed to rely on her community to help her rebuild. And from there, she started, as we were just speaking now, she started realizing that what makes things harder is the resistance, the reluctance to letting things be the way they are. Yeah, we lost Karen. Oh, I think she's there. We've got her back.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
I'm so sorry. This is a mountain living thing, power surge.
It's mountain living. Oh, there you are. You're back.
I'm so sorry. I was doing an interview a couple of days ago and a bear came through. So this is
no worries. This happens. I was just recapping a little bit of our conversation, and for our TV viewers, we're going to have to say goodbye to our TV viewers in a little bit. So I just want to remind them that your book is, oh my God, I'm blank. Rough Beauty, 40 Seasons of Mountain Living, and it's available now. And so, Karen, I always like to kind of wrap up in lightning round, kind of a series of questions. And so I had some curious questions. All of a sudden I thought, I wonder what might have been the most absurd thought you had while you were watching your house burn down.
Say that again.
What was the most absurd thought you had as you watched your house burn down? Because in moments of crisis, we sometimes have the craziest of thoughts.
Oh my God, that's a great question. I think the most absurd thought is the thought I had afterwards, which was, oh, I'm so relieved. Like I don't have anything anymore. That was that relief was real and great. It happened kind of the 2 days later. I was really angry at the people who showed up, because I lived in a mountain community, and people heard there was a fire, and so they came like it was a party, and there were people across the street passing a bottle of bourbon and watching my house burn.
Yeah.
And I, hated them all in that moment.
I'm sure. We'll say goodbye to our TV friends, but we'll stay on the radio and for our YouTube audience. Here's another question. You lost all of your cookbooks, this extraordinary collection of cookbooks.